So today I was thinking about the pros and cons of multi-generational housing. So it seems like there is this dilemma really often nowadays where we have the baby boomer generation and the millennial generation, and the baby boomers are now retiring. Some have retired a long time ago because it was a very large group of people, but others are retiring right now. Some will retire in a few years. And looking at their retirement, to me, what it's looking like right now is a lot of baby boomers have not prepared properly for retirement. And they just assume that Social Security is going to cover their butts. And it's really not. Don't get me wrong, not everybody's in the same boat. And there's a lot of people who have pensions and things. My husband's side, his mom didn't prepare for retirement. She had this point of view that everything would just work out somehow. And I've had that point of view many times where just, you know what, God will take care of me. It's okay. I don't need to worry right now. But because of that point of view, she didn't plan properly. And now her retirement is literally only Social Security. And she didn't even retire when she expected to because she got injured, forcing her into retirement. What I'm finding is a lot of baby boomers are in a similar situation where they thought it would work out. They were planning on retiring maybe a couple years later so that their Social Security check would be even bigger. And instead, they ended up getting injured or life happens and they retire a little bit sooner than they expected. Their checks are smaller than they expected, and what are they gonna do? They're in a pickle. They are in a very bad pickle. As my husband and I tried to think of what we could do to help, because he's an only child, and we feel like not only is she our responsibility as she gets older, but she is also a very, very valuable part of our lives. She's our kids' grandparent. She brings so much joy to our lives. And as an only child, there's such a unique relationship between my husband and his mom. And we couldn't imagine being too far away from her anyway. Right now, we live about 45 minutes away from her, but to live even further away would not be feasible. We would never move super far away from her unless it was like an extreme situation. And I also think that if we were to live in the same house in the sense of like she was just in one of the bedrooms, I think that we would struggle with, because I have such a strong sense of wanting my independence. And I struggle when I lose my independence, and I'm sure she would struggle with losing her independence too. And I feel like when I talk about multi-generational housing, that's one of the things people are super worried about. They're worried about losing their independence. They're worried that if they were in the same house, that independence would be shot. They'd be either codependent on each other all of a sudden, or they'd be on top of each other fighting. And that definitely can happen. Definitely, especially in a bedroom situation, because you really are on top of each other. You have to learn to come together on things that you might not need to come together on if you were just visiting, and you lived 45 minutes away, per se. My husband has this saying that I really love. He lived in Brazil for a couple years, and how does it go here? Wait, how does it go? Let's see. I We'll see here. He'll tell me if I'm wrong. Live close enough to your in-laws that you don't need to pack a bag to visit, but live far enough away that you can't just throw on your sandals and walk over. I think that's cute. However, I kind of differ from that mentality a little bit. I think it's a cute mentality and I like it, and we've lived by it. For us in our marriage, we've kind of decided that even though we've followed that most of our marriage, it's not really the motto that we want to follow per se anymore. We've been thinking about it a lot, and multi-generational housing just makes sense. It makes sense not to have your in-law or your mom in the same living space, but to instead have them in an attached apartment where they can have their own space, their own kitchen, their own everything living, but you just happen to basically be a next door neighbor with an attached wall. Multi-generational housing where you're living next to each other instead of in each other's space is very similar to living in a duplex or in a condo. So when baby boomers get old enough that they decide that they don't want to maintain a house anymore and they'd rather live in a condo, or they can't afford to maintain a house anymore and their choices are basically a condo or renting somewhere, then multi-generational housing actually is very similar to what they would find in a condo, except for it's next to family. It also gives the option to be able to have help when you need it. Instead of us driving 45 minutes when we find out that an ambulance showed up at Kirk's mom's house, we are a few seconds away from getting there if she calls us and says that she needs an ambulance, right? If she falls and breaks something, we can get to her fast and help fast instead of being so far away and feeling so helpless, but driving as fast as we can anyway. There's a lot of emotions that go into suddenly becoming a caregiver. And that happened to us this last summer. We were very emotionally burdened by the fear of losing his mom. And that fear made us think a lot about our situation. We have always felt like it is our job in our future to take care of his mom because she doesn't have anybody else for when she gets older to take care of her. When he was younger, it's just the way it is, you know? Like, he's the one who, in her old age, would make sure that she was okay. And yes, she has awesome neighbors, and we do have other family, but the closest family she has is Kirk. And so we've thought many times in our life, well, maybe like a mother-in-law apartment would be good. And that's exactly what multi-generational housing is. It's just a house that has a mother-in-law apartment. But in our situation, we realized that there's no way that she could do the stairs that are common in a mother-in-law apartment. And it's very rare to find a house that has a mother-in-law apartment that doesn't have a ton of stairs to go down. Like, a mother-in-law apartment in our area anyway is usually in the basement, and you go down this like really steep flight of stairs to get to the front door, which is really just a basement entrance. And they can be really nice, but they're almost always in the basement, and there's almost always a ton of stairs. There's only been 3 or 4 houses that we've seen in the last 5 years that would have worked at all for a multi-generational housing kind of situation. So it's been kind of an interesting thing over the last few years. Before Kirk's stepdad passed away, we had talked to both of them about possibly helping them financially by getting a multi-generational house together, and then their finances would be cleared up because we'd be covering the mortgage and the taxes and everything. They'd put in some of their equity to own that portion of the house. But then after that, we're the ones paying the mortgage on the house, and we're the ones paying the taxes, and they wouldn't have HOA fees anymore, and they could pay their portion of utilities, or we could take over that as well, depending on if their situation was good enough that they could handle paying their portion of the utilities. And honestly, for a little while, they were super excited about it, but I think the idea of moving is just hard in general, especially when you love your neighbors. And his mom loves her neighbors. They're great neighbors. And honestly, we love our neighbors too. I don't know. It's hard to imagine leaving our neighbors because they've been so awesome. Like, I know that if anything were to happen to us, they'd be right there to help. We have a really good neighborhood watch. We all look out for each other, and you don't always find that. And so I love this neighborhood, and it's hard to think about moving into another house. But the reality is, getting a house that can have a mother-in-law apartment in it makes sense for us. Having a space where his mom isn't upside down in her finances is so important. I think a lot of people are in the situation where if they're married, when they retire, they have 2 Social Security checks. Well, those 2 Social Security checks hold each other up as like one okay income. It's not an amazing income, but it's an okay income. And they're able to pay for their housing and their food. And they might not be able to have everything that they had when they were working, but they can live a reasonably normal life. Well, when one of those people pass away, all of a sudden that income is cut in half or more. And then what do? Right? That's the situation that we're in right now. Being upside down in all of the living costs versus the housing costs, and having the Social Security come in and not having enough to cover both living expenses and housing, because housing was just one of those original Social Security checks, and now you've got like you're living off of whatever it is that you have saved in the bank, and your entire Social Security is going to the house, or you're living off of Social Security and you're going into credit card debt in order to pay the house bill. It's just, a lot of people are in similar situations, and in that type of situation, the only option is multi-generational housing. I don't think that multi-generational housing is always the option. A mother-in-law apartment is not always the best option for a family. So you have to weigh the pros and cons. You have to think, okay, are either of the 2 people who would be living next to each other super type A and would be annoyed with the other person all the time? Because if someone's annoyed with you all the time and you're living next to them, eventually, even if you're not usually annoyed with them, you're going to eventually get annoyed with them. And if you've got 2 type A people living next to each other, you are definitely going to have an issue with battling each other. So definitely don't want that. Don't want that. But if you've got a couple people who are pretty low key and are willing to work with each other on things, and really who are open and honest and are willing to maybe talk about what they expect before they ever go into it, I expect to only see you like once a week, with the exception of seeing you out in the yard or something. But I expect you not to come over to my side of the house except for maybe once a week when we have planned. Those kind of expectations need to be set before anyone ever moves into a mother-in-law apartment. And possibly, I mean, I don't know if we would sign a contract with those kind of expectations in it, but that would be a good idea to have a contract with those kind of expectations in it, just so that everybody kind of knows. A long, long time ago, like 100 years ago, they used to live in multi-generational lifestyles all the time. But nowadays, we don't. This really started changing right around the 50s. And in some ways, yes, it was a good change. In other ways, no. But the reason it changed was because of marketing. Like, we are such a brainwashed people in so many ways. It changed because builders wanted more people to buy houses instead of living in the same house as their relatives. And so basically they said, okay, let's get all these newlyweds to get their own house, and that will signify that they have a new household together. Where before, the grandparents often lived with their children who were in the process of having children. In fact, if you look at the way that mothers used to have children, what would happen is the grandma would make sure that all the household things got done so that the mom could rest and take care of the baby and focus on recovery. So now we give women like 6 weeks off of work, right? Or sometimes it's longer, or sometimes it's not as long as that. But in general, we expect 6 weeks and then you're back on your feet. Get going, right? Way back when, they didn't do that. It was a whole year that they expected the mom to take it easy after she gave birth. And that actually helped her uterus to fully recover much easier because she wasn't pushing herself too hard to lift and to do chores and all of that kind of stuff. She was lifting the baby and she was still doing mothering and the work of motherhood, but she was doing it step by step, little by little, to make sure that her body fully recovered so that she wouldn't have health problems down the line. And the only reason that she could do this was because the grandma was living with them and could take over that portion of the household duties. So it is kind of interesting to look at life now versus life back in the 1900s. And yeah, it's very interesting. Like 1900, 1910, I mean, you can go further back, but that's kind of the era I'm talking about. So basically, we went from this time where you often had 3 generations living together to a time where the marketing told everybody, be your own household, be your own family, go live away from your parents so that you can be independent. And there is nothing wrong with that. In some ways, it's a wonderful thing that so many people have found independence through living away from their parents. And in a lot of ways, I'm really grateful that we aren't living with our parents right now. But I think the new form, it's like the modern form of multi-generational living, is having an apartment, because that takes away a lot of the problems. And maybe back in the 1900s, they didn't have as many problems with fighting with relatives when they lived with them, because they were used to the idea and all their neighbors did it and it just was common. But maybe not. Maybe there were problems because they lived together. Maybe they were a little bit on top of each other, and when the marketing came along and said, hey, go be independent, they were like, oh, that's a thing I can do, and it would be seen as normal now. So that is possible, and I don't know that there's really a way for me to know for sure how it was in the majority of homes. But I think definitely now, having experienced so much independence, both for the baby boomer who needs to move in and for the millennial who is offering a home for their parent, I think both of them have lived through so much independence that it would be very, very difficult to live in just bedrooms of the same living space together. To have to share the same TV and not be able to pick their own shows per se, to share the same kitchen, to share the same eating area. I think in some ways, maybe some people could do that without a problem, but a lot of people, after experiencing so much independence, they don't really want someone coming in and sharing all of those spaces with them all the time. Once in a while, fine, but I know for me, it would be very challenging. And so I think the best of both worlds is where it just feels like they're a next door neighbor, and you still plan. You still call before you walk over. You still have to ring the doorbell. You don't just walk in. You treat it like they're a next door neighbor and not living in your house. And it takes away that level of, oh my gosh, you're all up in my space. Get out of my space, please. Yeah, it takes that away. You want that gone so that you can have a happy life. But you also want to be able to get to them fast if they fall. You want to be able to help them when they need help. You don't want to be a half hour away if you are their main person. And so if you're gonna be the main person who would help, an in-law apartment is the optimal thing. There's a new thing with multi-gen housing. There's like a couple of builders, I think Lennar is one of the main builders, that have started to do multi-gen housing. And I love the way they do it because there's no extra stairs. So basically there's like two front doors, and you go into the one and there's an apartment, you go into the other, and it's the family house with the younger family with their kids, and then the apartment is for the in-law. It's very cool. In our area, we don't have a lot of Lennar homes. There's not a lot of multi-gen homes that are on the same level like that. And so we've been looking for a really long time, but we weren't really serious until recently. There's a couple options out there. We found 2 homes recently that we really liked. One of them we would need to finish, but I don't mind finishing to some degree because then we can personalize the space to what we need. Another home is finished, but it was finished a long, long time ago, so it needs a lot of updates. So, and I'm leaning more towards the one that needs a lot of updates because there are no stairs at all for her. There would be stairs for us, but not for her. And if if we could get her into a place that doesn't have stairs, that would be way better, especially with everything that has been going on. There is some evidence that if you find a place with stairs, that actually can help keep the elderly healthy for longer. So I don't think you should always try for not having any stairs. Having like a few stairs is actually a good thing. Or if they don't have stairs, if they find some steps outside of their apartment to practice walking up and down on once a day, it's actually really, really good for their heart and for their muscle health. But in some instances, it doesn't make sense. Like if they have problems with their back, or if they tend to fall a lot, or there's like some stability issues that you don't want to have. You don't want to have them falling when they go inside, or you want to think about if they ended up in a wheelchair, are you going to be able to get them in and out of this apartment? One of the places we found is completely wheelchair accessible. Completely. 100% wheelchair accessible for them, not for us. And I don't think that you need a big house in order to have a MultiGen house, but definitely a lot of them are really big. For us, we'd need a slightly bigger house because we also run a photography business out of our home. And then I like to have a health and wellness office in my house. I do health coach kind of things, and it's kind of like my oasis room. And then I like to also keep my exercise equipment in there. So that's like one office. And then we need an office space for our photography studio. Because we essentially need 2 offices plus the space for our house, we need a slightly larger house to be able to have the mother-in-law apartment in there as well. In our current house, we could fit her if we got rid of our offices and if the basement were not a basement. She'd have stairs here, so we wouldn't be able to just bring her into our current home. Really, there are a lot of pros and cons, and I probably haven't covered all of the pros, and I probably haven't covered all of the cons. But all in all, I find MultiGen housing to be a fantastic way of coming together the way families should. Family is everything. Family is everything. I can't imagine not being there for my family. I can't imagine family going to a care facility unless it was for health reasons and not because of needing the housing. It's really hard for me to understand letting go of your family like that and only being allowed to visit sometimes. Seeing this past year of people not being able to go see loved ones at care facilities because they were worried of people catching things and stuff. I can't imagine not being allowed to see and care for our family. There is something that happens to your mental health when you can't see your loved ones anymore. And it takes the joy out of life. And to live in MultiGen housing instead of a care facility gives you the option to continue seeing each other, because you are the care provider. And if you are the care provider, you have to see each other. We almost lost Kirk's mom. And when that happened, our hearts were like burning with just this crushing sensation of not being able to go see her because of all of the rules of not being able to see her. We thought we were just going to have to wish her goodbye from the inside and not be able to tell her goodbye. And some of that goes away when you can be right there. When you can plan, okay, even if at care facilities they aren't allowing people to see anyone, here in our own house, as your next door neighbor from the same house, I will still keep seeing you twice a week. It's okay. I will get your groceries so that you don't have to risk your health by going to the market. I can do this for you. If you can't do the dishes, I can. Like, the basics of being a care provider for an older parent are not that hard. It's not that hard to go do a load of dishes by just throwing them in the dishwasher. It's not that hard to grab groceries for them. It's not hard to see them once a week and have dinner with them so that they feel like they are valued and so that they know how much you value them. But it is hard to let them go because you're not allowed to see them because of where they're living. MultiGen housing is definitely the way to go if you're in a situation like that. I guess the thing about MultiGen housing that does make me nervous is the potential for things that I cannot foresee. So with MultiGen housing, if you are that care provider who's grabbing them groceries and that kind of thing, and they're still relatively healthy, that's one thing. And that totally helps them financially and is an amazing decision to make financially. It helps both people actually, because when you put your money together, your equity together to buy a house together instead of living separately, that money goes a lot further for the amount of square footage that you can get and the amenities that you can get to fit your situation. It just does. It goes way further. Definitely staying separate works in a lot of situations, but when you put your money together, it does go further to be able to fit whatever you're looking for in a home. And so combining assets is a very smart move financially. However, I think about the future a lot, and in the future, what is it going to be like? What if she were to get really injured again? I'm not a nurse, and even though I have a nursing spirit of wanting to help and being willing to help however I can, I'm not a nurse, and if she were to get injured again, then she would probably have to have a therapist coming in quite often, and she'd probably, if she got to the ripe old age of needing to have someone change her diapers or needing someone to come in to shower her instead of her being able to do that herself, I don't know how comfortable I would be with that. I know with my grandparents, when they were in that kind of situation, my family took care of it. And so I figure we would take care of it, but what if it just was too much, you know? Like, because in some instances it can feel like too much. So I by no means feel like there would be any issue with having them as a next door neighbor in a mother-in-law apartment that's on ground level. However, years down the road, it's probably 10, 15 years down the road after making this decision, you could be looking at do I need to hire someone to come in and change diapers, or do I start doing that? And that gets really, really expensive. Really, just for future reference, because we don't need it right now, we were looking at the costs of someone coming in to do that kind of thing, to help change diapers and get showers and just do the normal everyday things with the elderly person. And the very, very cheapest type of person who does that was like $3,000 a month. And then it just went up from there, depending on how much they did and how they helped. And that's a lot of money. Oh, it's a lot. So the other option, if you have to hire someone for something like that in the future, is to get insurance for it. So there's a special, I can't remember the name of it. If I find the name of it, maybe I can post it on the bottom of the screen or something while I'm talking about it. But there is a type of insurance that basically, it's really, really expensive, but it covers all of what your expenses would be if suddenly you need an in-home nurse. And because in-home nursing is so expensive, so pricey, if you think you might need it in the next 6 months to a year, then it's totally worth the insurance cost, because it's so expensive to get a nurse, but the insurance itself is really expensive too. And so if you don't think you'll need it for a really long time, it's not worth getting. So basically it's like $400 or $500 a month, which is a lot of money. But if you've been paying that $400 or $500 a month and then suddenly you need it, and you would have been paying like $3,000 a month, then it's worth it. But like, you don't want to pay $500 a month for 15 years and then finally you need it at the end of 15 years. So it doesn't make sense unless there are some indicators to make you think you might need it really soon. If we were to get that type of insurance at some point, that would protect us from the possibility of, are we going to ever need to change diapers in this situation? The trick would be to get the insurance at the right time, because you would need the insurance a little bit before. I don't know when the right time is, and it seems like often it's easy to miss the right time on things. So that's how insurance goes, I guess. All in all, I think MultiGen housing is amazing. To have main floor living that is a separate apartment, but they are still really close to family, is amazing. Preferably, you'd want to kind of soundproof the walls between, but the idea of having family so close by is so wonderful. As long as you follow guidelines to steer clear of each other's space so that you can still have independent lives, but just be next door to each other, I think it's a wonderful idea. If you start kind of overlapping in space, I don't know if it would be a wonderful idea anymore. It might get really frustrating. If you are thinking about MultiGen housing, definitely think through that. Like, what personalities are we? Are we going to be on top of each other? Because if that's the personalities you're dealing with, you might need to think of a different situation. But if everybody is super open to just being courteous of each other and not stepping on toes, and they're not like super, I need things my way, then I think it can be such a wonderful blessing. It gives people a purpose to live. Family is part of the purpose for living. Helping each other, loving each other, sharing growth with each other, sharing stories. It's just a wonderful part of life that I think is so easy to miss out on by living so far and by not seeing each other as often. To wrap it all up, I do think that multi-gen housing is a very feasible option, but we do have other options. A condo within a 5-minute drive would also be a feasible option for us. It's just as feasible to find a place together and get even more of the amenities that would be good for Kirk's mom. So hopefully this perspective kind of helps you get a little bit of perspective. Multi-gen housing is cool, and it's cool to look at the history of it a little bit, and it is so popular. I think the last thing I read was 80 million Americans are now in multi-generational housing. That's amazing. It's like it used to be the norm, and then it became trendy to not do multi-gen housing at all. And now it's kind of trending back to let's take care of our family. Let's do multi-gen housing. And I love that. I love that we as a nation are trending back to being family focused in at least one way, at least this way. And even if we're not family focused in every way as a nation, at least as a nation, we are coming back to be more family focused in the way that we choose how to care for each other with housing. These big decisions that are not talked about as often as they should be online. These big decisions, big. I hope that whatever situation you're in that's making you think of multi-gen housing, I hope it resolves itself well, and I wish you all the best. If you liked this video, I would love to hear a little bit about what you're thinking about multi-gen housing in the comments, and I'd love if you would subscribe. Let's build a little tribe here. On that note, have a great day. Bye.